All right. Well, welcome everybody to the next edition here of the Beyond Compliance webinar and podcast series. I'm Brian Sharp with Safety Chain Software, your sponsor and host, and just really want to thank everybody for joining us. This is kind of a special edition. It's the first swing at doing something very specific in terms of verticals around the seafood industry. So we're really grateful to have quite the expert in the house today, Scott Zimmerman, who I'll be introducing later. But in this month's session, we're going to be talking about assessing risk and ensuring quality in the seafood supply chain. So obviously, we're going to have a lot of folks in that industry, but I think a lot of what Scott will be talking about applies around QA and food safety in general. But I think we've got a really fun, very specific session ahead for everybody, and thank you for making time in your busy schedules to join us. If you are joining us for the first time, first, welcome. Second thing is a little background on this series. Many of you have been part of the ride we've been on with our FSMA Friday webinar series that's gone on now for, gosh, about 6 years, one of the longest standing industry updates. It's been fantastic. But one of the things that we have found is that people were really looking for that tactical, very tangible content that they could apply in their business, not just what's going on with FSMA. And so we've designed this Beyond Compliance series to do just that. So we have an opportunity to bring in experts like Scott Zimmerman, practitioners, other thought leaders and industry experts in various parts of the industry to come in and just share what are they seeing, what are they doing, what are the best practices and trends and strategies that they're employing either as a consultant or in their own businesses. So we really do design these for you, and we welcome your feedback on topics or even presenters that you'd like to see. And we really do work hard to make these as content-rich as possible. So we hope you enjoy the format, and we'll continue to come back. And if you keep coming back, we'll keep making more. So we hope you enjoy this one. As you can imagine, these take quite a bit of time, effort, and energy to put on, and they're obviously also at no charge, which we are more than happy to sponsor this series here at Safety Chain. And we always like to remind you that a lot of what you're going to learn here is going to be from the consulting side and from the strategy side, but we're also here on the technology side at Safety Chain able to support a lot of what you're doing. And we have a complete food quality management system where you can run your food safety, food quality supplier compliance programs. And we're really built to help you improve your productivity, your profitability, and maintain that compliance. So if you're looking for some ways to make what you learn here a little bit easier and faster, more effective, I hope you'll check us out over at safetychain.com. We've got a lot of fun stuff going on, and would love to share more with you when the time is right. Before we dig into the good stuff, the reason you came, I want to go through a few housekeeping items here that'll help you during the course of the webinar potentially. First is you'll find we try and keep these conversational, right? So we say they're informal but professional. So these are obviously very important topics, but we try not to take ourselves too seriously. So you'll hear a lot of really great content, and the idea is to make it as conversational and easy for you to take away little bite-sized pieces as you can. So we hope you appreciate that format. It's not overly polished and that sort of thing. A lot of good stuff, and we're lucky to have a great trainer here today, and amongst other things. The second part is ask questions. So the best way to get something out of these is to ask questions, and if you have something general, those are great. If they get a little too specific, sometimes we'll take those offline, but we do get to all the questions. We try and carve out a little time at the end for Q&A, so we should have a few minutes for that. If we don't, we'll make sure and take those offline with you as well, and or connect you with Scott after the webinar for something very specific to your needs. You'll also notice that only the panelists are listed, so if you do have a question, it's not being broadcast to the world. We'll kind of sift through those. You'll just see myself, Scott, and our back-end team here running the show. So don't be shy in sharing that, and if you don't see anybody else, that is why we keep those all hidden. And probably the most important or most common question, I should say, is there is a recording being done. We will share the link, so if you want to just sit back and relax, we'll make sure and share that. Also, Scott's been kind enough to allow us to share the PowerPoint as well. There's a ton of great content in there. So all that will be coming in the subsequent days after the webinar. So stay tuned for that, and don't worry about missing anything. We'll make sure you get it. And last but not least, if you have any audio issues, there's 2 ways to dial in for audio. You know, you can use your phone or web. So if you're having issues on one, sometimes a good trick is either to swap to the other one, and you can do that with the event tab at the top of your page there. It has all the call-in information or the login for the computer audio. Conversely, I know this sounds magical, but sometimes just the log out and log back in can do the magic trick as well. So we'll do our best. If you have technical issues, definitely feel free to send those over using the chat box. If you have a question that you'd like to share or have Scott touch on in the Q&A or after the webinar, there's a little Q&A box at the top right, and those are the best way to submit your questions. And again, we're going to try and field those and save them towards the end of the webinar. So with that, we're going to dive into it. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, we are lucky enough to partner with Scott and his firm, and the idea came up about doing something specific for the seafood industry, and obviously something he's very passionate about, but something that we do hear a lot about from our customers. So we're really excited to try this real focused topic, and today our title is Data Drives Success, Assessing Risk and Ensuring Quality in the Seafood Supply Chain. And we are very pleased to have Scott Zimmerman join us. And I'm sure if you are in and around the industry, you know him. You've probably been to a training or listened to a training, been part of a training, or even worked with his firm on the consulting side. But just to give you a little background, since 2000, Mr. Zimmerman has worked in food safety, quality assurance, regulatory compliance, aquaculture, and fisheries management. He has professional training in HACCP prerequisite programs, U.S. import-export regulation, first, second, and third-party audits, traceability, withdrawal, recall, and product attention. His primary focus is GFSI benchmark certification standards and regulatory requirements for wild and aquacultured seafood. Mr. Zimmerman earned his bachelor's degree at the University of Miami and a master's degree in applied science and aquaculture at James Cook University in Townsville, Australia, which we were talking a bit about. He holds a wide variety of certifications. I won't go through the whole list, but has quite the prerequisite and background and experience in the industry. And we're very pleased to have you join us. So, Scott, can you hear me okay? Got you on the line here?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to first welcome. Thanks for being here. We're excited to have you. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, get out of your way, and let you get to the good stuff here.
Well, thanks a lot for the introduction, Brian. This is a great opportunity to work with a great company like Safety Chain. There's so many synergies between what you guys are doing and what I've been doing over the last couple of years, and basically acting like an outside QAQC firm, a third party, a new set of eyes. I've been through a wide variety of facilities. I have the ball here so I can click through here in the presentation.
Yeah, you should be all set to scroll forward. There you go.
Okay.
Great.
Okay. All right, great. As Brian pointed out, my background is in aquaculture, so I come from a fish farming background. And basically taking what, you know, our dedication to data and trending that data and understanding how it's affecting our farming systems and our productivity, took HACCP and kind of ran with it. I you know, came back from Australia thinking that I was going to farm fish, and that did not happen. So I ended up working on the other end of the industry. We import a lot of seafood into the United States, so started looking at the compliance issues regarding those imports, of which there are many, and we'll discuss some of those issues. Most of my audits and inspections are occurring in Central and South America, as well as a handful here in the United States. And basically, I just want to bring to the table my experiences as an auditor, as an implementer, and as a trainer. I work very closely with the federal and state governments in calibrating myself to meeting the intent of the law, and I realized that there's a wide range of perspectives. There's you know, a lot of experienced folks out there, and there's a lot of inexperienced folks, and we're just trying to work through this mantra of continuous improvement, and it's either there or it's not there in a lot of cases. So that's been my experience as a third party. Why is this important? Why is QAQC important? Because, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we are importing the majority of the products, and those products are not being inspected by the federal government. The industry is policing itself. Whether it's through finished product testing, whether it's through third-party and second-party audits, there's a lot of paperwork going around, and there's a lot of trust. And there's a lot more dedication to production than there is QAQC, and that's just you know, that's just a factor of operating in this space. The margins are extremely tight, and in order to compete, the price is first, and then the quality's got to be there as well, depending on what you're doing, what your intended use is of that product. So finding that balance between production and quality assurance is definitely tough, but that's what we're shooting for, because there's a lot of different problems that need to be addressed, and we're working in a new day and age with new tools to find out about these problems, and your dirty laundry can get hung out to dry, you know, and everybody's going to see it. So there's a wide variety of problems that are being picked up on either by industry itself or through detentions from FDA, whether it's, you know, and some of these issues are HACCP related and some of them are GMP related. Tuna and hepatitis, you know, it really also depends on what the intended use is of these products. This tuna was being used for a sushi product. So, you know, it's intended for raw consumption, and this is why people were contracting hepatitis. Again, another RTE product, and not intended to be cooked, smoked salmon, picked up Listeria monocytogenes from processing environment, and so now FDA is on their, what we're calling swabathons, to try to find this organism. And through whole genome sequencing, now has the ability to link these outbreaks to the facilities and the unique species identification capabilities that this technology has. There's a wide variety of issues, and there's a wide variety of products. I'm not going to belabor these issues. Just so you know, there are different control strategies that are recommended by the FDA to deal with all these issues, and if you're not calibrated to what the FDA is doing, then you're basically, you're not going to pass muster. This is just an example. This is egregious, obviously. I was brought in to do some survey work. But, you know, I mean, you could see what's going on with the cases here with the watermarks, and you can see obvious discoloration on the product, slumping of the cases. This is the last thing that you want to see in production, at any stage of production, for that matter. In this day and age, you know, the CDC has put together some numbers, but you know, you can imagine that these numbers are not indicative of what's really going on in our population. A lot, you know, if you contract some sort of pathogenic bacteria, I mean, who knows at what stage you may have picked it up, if it's directly associated with something that you've consumed, or if it's from a food contact surface. But just know that And I can't emphasize this enough, through food safety news, through other, LinkedIn and other forms of outreach, people are going to find information and link you to these problems much quicker than they ever have, and rightfully so. And so we're really thirsty for more information about the supply chain, and I think that the Food Safety Modernization Act, as well as some other new laws like the Seafood Import Monitoring Program, are pointing to that thirst and saying, and our new access to information allows us to determine equivalency of meeting U.S. laws, whether it has to do with food safety or supply chain problems like illegal and unreported fisheries and the use of slave labor. These are serious concerns, whether it's, we're trying to meet U.S. laws or your internal policies as a company. So these are the things that we're trying to attack. We're trying to set up quality preventive-based programs to determine the level of risk and kind of disconnected here. Determine the level of risk, determine what the control strategies are, and make sure that they're being implemented. As far as how you are going to see the problems arise from the FDA, you could have facility warnings, which are commonly called 43 letters. Your product can be either intentionally adulterated or unintentionally adulterated with, chemicals or, mislabeling, misbranding. Products that are commonly detained end up on a red list, which we call detention without physical examination. Or products could be out of specification for quality and condition, over treatments with, sulfite or tripolyphosphate, improper net weights, bad uniformity, bad counts on your shrimp. You're selling, 1620s and you're actually getting, 41, 45 counts, for example. Decomposition is another very serious issue. That's takes a trained, calibrated nose to determine whether or not there's real decomposition and adulteration, persistence of decomposition, odors of decomposition like indole, the presence of indole or putrescine or cadaverine, these types of sour smells and persistent odors. And mislabeling and species substitution are serious concerns in this industry. There's been some exposés done by non-governmental organizations that have found this issue of mislabeling to be rampant with some species, especially like genuine red snapper or subtropical marine fish. So what are we going to do about this? Well, the seafood industry has made a commitment to continuous improvement since '97, technically. Whether or not it's been universal, these controls have been universally applied is a whole other issue. But we are trying to focus on preventive controls. I mean, we've been doing this for many years now. We've determined through our hazard analysis, by setting up all the steps in our process and determining what types of hazards are associated with our finished products, we come up with those steps in the process that we can prevent, eliminate, and reduce those significant hazards to acceptable levels. Basically making sure that we're focused on producing products through a specific approach and outlining that approach and determining if those hazards are present, making sure that we implement those control strategies, monitor them, verify that they're working, and keep records to prove that those controls are in place, as well as looking at the finished product through quality control process. Taking those analytical measurements, making sure that we're meeting making sure that the results are what we expect them to be by meeting those specifications. And we're doing this through HACCP. We're forming a team. We're assessing risk. We're establishing those critical control points, and we're setting up operational and critical limits at those steps in the process, monitoring those steps, and taking corrective actions if we exceed those critical limits at those steps. We're verifying. I have VHP there for Veterinary Health Plan. That has to do with implementing this in an aquaculture setting for aquaculture drugs. But just know that these HACCP principles can be applied at virtually any sort of production. And so we have records at our finish step to make sure that we can prove to the supply chain that those controls are in place and they're being continuously improved on. I can't tell you how many operations I've been to that I never see corrective actions being taken. That always, none of the critical limits are ever exceeded, and these operations are perfect. Go back through the documentation and see for yourself to make sure that these corrective actions are actually being taken. Federal government requires documentation at all these steps to make sure that there's truly a commitment to continuous improvement. Aside from HACCP, that's Code of Federal Regulation 123, there's another law, Code of Federal Regulation 110, or what is now considered 117. The Preventive Controls Rule covers current good manufacturing practices, which include evidence of the 8 key areas of sanitation are in place. There has to be documentation that talks about hygiene, pest control, the use of chemicals and the storage of those chemicals, the potential for cross-contamination throughout the facility, the condition of the water and the ice that's being used, the condition and cleanliness of food contact surfaces, and whether or not you have a schedule to clean those contact surfaces, as well as the use of hand wash and stations and laboratories. All this stuff costs money. But I can't tell you how many operations I've been into overseas that the hand wash sinks are smashed, and there's no water running out of these things. There's no soap. They're handing out toilet paper. Okay, what happens if you don't get it on the first wipe? So this is kind of crazy. But the reality is I've been in these facilities, and this is what's happening. So you have to understand these folks are returning to their own homes, and they're living in some cases in squalor. What you would think is in comparison to the way that we're living here is quite grim. Earthen floors and sleeping in a hammock, covered, with a mosquito net. So, some folks prefer to live like that as opposed to the way that we live. So there needs to be that understanding as well. But, their common practices and culture and hygiene are much different than they are here in the States. And you have to, I can't repeat this enough, but we are importing over 90% of our seafoods into the United States. So, the commitment to these types of prerequisite programs in HACCP is just not high on the agenda. So, it's kind of a tough pill to swallow, but these types of preventive maintenance programs, foreign material prevention programs, they need to be considered when you are considering your suppliers. Here in these photos, you see, they're using a metal shovel on a tile floor. There was smashed tile underneath this ice here. You could see daylight underneath this door in the picture on the right. That's instant access, and that inside that same room, they're storing eviscerated fish and shrimp heads. So it's just stunk in there, and there's instant access for flies to get into the facility. More foreign material, the use of tape, that's a no-no. The use of these bags, these sacks to carry ice from outside facilities. Those bags were getting shredded up, and it ended up as foreign material in the product. This photo here, you got some bug zappers conveniently placed right above the fish, right above the cutting deck, so probably not a great idea. But these are the types of things that you definitely want to consider in cross-contamination and through your GMPs as opposed to HACCP. With all that being said, HACCP programs, by and large, are cut and paste operations that have been floating around for years. That's what I've been seeing in these audit in these processing environments. A lot of sharing going on between facilities, and unfortunately, there was a misinterpretation of the standard of the requirements from the original person that wrote these programs, and then they try to implement them at facilities that don't do the same things. So there's just a lack of records, a lack of monitoring, verification, and validation. Validation occurs before the plan is put in place, and that's to validate, like, for example, a cook step. Validation would determine the size of the cooker is appropriate for the size of the amount of product, and are you able to get that kill step over that time at that temperature consistently from batch to batch, from lot to lot. And so they're using, they're saying, oh, this process is valid when it has nothing to do with the equipment that's being used. So it's one thing to have a program, but there needs to be evidence of the application of these programs. And the reason why I emphasize this is because everybody's hanging their hat on a letter of guarantee or a certificate. And the reality is that certificate is supposed to link back to these records of implementation of HACCP and GMPs. And really what you should be looking at is that evidence as opposed to, oh, I have a certificate. That's great. I've checked off another box on my list of documents that I need to get to bring the product into the United States, into my customer, and it really needs to be taken a step further because hanging your hat on affidavits, letters of guarantees, certificates. I mean, do you even know who's doing this audit overseas? In a lot of cases, the salespeople don't care. So the question is the system working? Well, if we have underreported illnesses from CDC, we're inspecting 1% from the FDA, and they're catching stuff through the system, whether it's pathogens or drugs or chemicals or some form of adulteration. I think that there needs to be that quality assurance can be taken to a second level. Just because I've seen it from from a corporate perspective, from the distribution chain here in Miami to looking at facilities overseas and being inside those facilities and understanding what their perspective is on compliance, and realizing what the FDA and GFSI benchmark schemes expect out of processors and operators. And I'm not seeing these things match up. I'm seeing a lot of falsified records. I'm seeing a lot of old programs, a lot of non-applicable controls that are just cut and paste from old operations. And so there's got to, I'm not saying that I have the solutions. I'm not saying that everybody is doing it this way. I'm just saying that these problems are legitimate. Adherence to these quality control and quality assurance programs is just not universal. There is a disconnect occurring, and in this day and age, we cannot accept this any longer as the status quo. We are moving, technology is moving at leaps and bounds, and it's only a matter of time before the biggest companies in the world make a real commitment to these, to automating this process of production and collecting key data elements from the system that are not so easily corrupted. And that's a big step far away from you know, commitment to affidavits and letters of guarantee. So you know, there needs to be an enlightening of, and there needs to be, you know, senior management needs to make start taking this stuff seriously, because these strains of bacteria are being linked directly to the processing facilities. And so if it's all about the bottom line, well, you need to speak to your lawyers about that, because the writing's on the wall as far as the FDA is concerned. They're applying these preventive controls to new operations that have never seen these requirements before. They're requiring foreign supplier verification at a level much greater than what the seafood industry faces through import verification. And then the social accountability issue, the traceability issue, especially in the seafood supply chain. I can't tell you how many middlemen there are through, you know, in these, you know, products coming from very remote areas throughout the world. We're seeing more outbreaks and warnings and recalls. We're linking those recalls directly back to the suppliers. And so the implications are there. We are thirsty for information. We're thirsty to make the supply chain more transparent. So the reality is, you know, we are developing the tools. Walmart's been doing this for years now, and you know, making a commitment to the blockchain. I just saw a commercial from IBM the other day, making, you know, tracing soup through the supply chain, and you know how easy it's going to be for them. So we have software, we have new automation tools throughout the supply chain and production process that we can, we are able to automate a lot of processes these days and make this information a lot more transparent, which is why I made a commitment to Safety Chain, because this software is going to start allowing processors to trend our data and collect more data from production systems. Take less, you know, there will be less opportunity to falsify the data as we start depending on automation. And HACCP just inherently is going to work better once we're able to trend and use the data and share the data in a digitized platform. And so that's really, you know, my presentation. I just, you know, kind of a canary in the coal mine person. I've been in a lot of operations that do operate very well, and it's really a pleasure to see that commitment that senior management makes to quality assurance and quality control. It's, you know, some operations are just like a fine-tuned machine. There's, you know, it's a cultural change that occurs in operations that make commitments to continuous improvement, and it is a pleasure to see that. It's not a pleasure to see operations that try to circumvent the system, and there's a good handful of them out there that that do that. So, you know, that's kind of my presentation there. You know, I think I've left enough time to answer some questions, I hope. And,
yeah, no, thank you, Scott. We do. We have certainly time for that, and appreciate the the insight, certainly from your experience. You paint a very challenging picture, so I'm sure those that are watching and listening can appreciate some of the challenges you see out there every day. One question that's come up is about the FDA. You touched on just a little bit about what scale exactly are they using to grade product, and then how do they determine product failure? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about sensory analysis when it comes to decomp, and they're judging products on a 0 to 100 basis, where over 50 is a failure. And so, there's a wide variety of reasons why those products could be considered a failure, but it also is going to depend on the size of the lot and whether or not there's presence of a pathogen in the lab setting. But one product fails, like for histamine and 18 subs, the product is a failure. So, and the lot fails. And I don't suggest that you, send the, or try to have the product reconditioned or try to appeal the process because you're essentially opening Pandora's box on your supply chain for the FDA to start really digging deep on your ability to control histamine or whatever the adulterant or hazard is that came up in the supply chain. So, it's difficult, for people to swallow. They go to their cold storage facilities and they take their own internal samples and they smell the product, they thaw it out, but if their noses aren't calibrated to what decomp is and the persistent odor of decomposition, then they're not on the same page as the bench analyst. So,
sure. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. Yeah, so one about specs, and what are some of the key attributes people should be focused on in terms of listing for specs?
That's a good question. It really is going to depend on the species that you're dealing with. So, obviously with shrimp, as I mentioned, size is a major concern in the uniformity within that package of count per pound, and making sure that, especially net weight, for example, is also, in short weighting is a very serious concern in seafood industry. That's, basically putting too much of an ice glaze on the product and calling that ice weight is fish weight. So, we need to deglaze the product and make sure that the protein in the package is meeting the declared weight on the package, and so you're not selling ice as fish. On shrimp, presence of shell, for example, on a product that's peeled and deveined and no shell. That would be a defect. The presence of melanosis or black spots on the shrimp shell, that's not within specification. That's another concern. Other issues may be like length of the product, workmanship. Is it ragged? Is there throat meat present? Is there any other extraneous material there? A good product specification is really key to communicating what your intention, the intended user, especially like if it's a cruise ship or something like this. You don't want to walk up to the buffet booth and the person in front of you gets, 13 to 15 count shrimp, and then, all that's left in the buffet case is 41 45s or something like this. That's not fair to the other consumers. Right. So, specifications are really important. And then there's, part of the part of the specification is not just the quality of the finished product, but you know, how it moved through the supply chain. Was there, you know, temperature data collected? Was the first processor certified? Was the secondary processor certified? Was the farm in the supply chain, you know, the BAP certifies all the way back to the farms and the hatcheries and the feed mills and the processing plants. They have a 4-star system in their case, so they can certify the entire supply chain. So these are types of considerations you want to take into when you're dealing with specs.
Yeah, a lot of variables there. So you touched on shrimp and farms. So it must have piqued some interest for somebody here. So they asked, would a shrimp raising facility in the Midwest be considered a farm?
Shrimp, yeah. Anybody that's raising shrimp is a farm. You know, there's no two ways about it. You're growing, you know, animals for commercial production. That is a farm. If they're doing it for bait shrimp, you know, or that would be a different scenario. If the product's not intended for human consumption, that sometimes is the case. But I don't really think that that's commercially viable at this point. I mean, maybe not super popular. I think you'd see that more often. More bait shrimp is just kind of offal or bycatch that's being caught. They do focus on a couple of different species of shrimp for bait. But yeah, so yeah, if you're raising shrimp for production, that's a problem.
Okay. Let me wrap up with this. Is when I try to ask experts like you that are out in the field, particularly with the audit experience. You know, if we were all sitting around and, you know, you had a handful of facility owners or QA managers, and, you know, you mentioned sometimes you walk in these facilities and they don't have anything, or they have very little, and some do very well. But for those that are maybe trying to get this stuff right-sized and get management buy-in, where would you suggest someone start, right? If they know there's definitely room for improvement, there's so many variables at play here. What's the kind of like the one piece of advice you would give to a group like that on how they could get started or first steps?
My advice is to follow the law, the state and federal laws, and the U.S. FDA and whatever your state is. If your state doesn't have guidance, go to the University of Florida's website, go to University of Oregon's website, University of Washington, University of Rhode Island. They all have Sea Grant offices, and you know the guidance on HACCP and good management practices is very clear. You know, you got to do an analysis of your process and come up with those steps in the process that need to be controlled, whether it's associated with your species or the products that you're producing. And then you have to have good management practices that make a commitment to the 8 key areas of sanitation that we talked about. If you can't do those things, then you really shouldn't be in production. And you don't even consider certification, okay? Start collecting data, start doing things according to, you know, it's very prescriptive, the FDA's 4th edition. It is the guideline for the preventive controls rule, what they came up with in the 4th edition of the seafood HACCP guidance. And you know, with the right trainer, you can get adherence and understand how to meet the intent of the law, and digest it in a way that you understand what policies you need to implement, and what records you're going to be able to show the officer to show that you're compliant with the standard. And then you could take it to that next level with your prerequisite programs and, you know, certification.
Right.
But first, chop it up into pieces. You don't try to attack the certification thing without complying with the federal law first.
Yeah, no, that's good practical advice. I like the chopping it up. Well, I think with that, Scott, I think you gave us a lot of good info, and I appreciate the questions that have come in and the ability to kind of fire those off on you. If you have more questions, obviously we have had his contact info up there, but you're more than welcome to respond to the email we'll send out. We'll also include Scott's contact info. His website also has a ton of great content. In addition, at Safety Chain, we have a lot of really helpful resources as well. We'll be turning this webinar into both a written resource and a replay, and we'll send those links out in due time. We also have some future webinars you may want to check out if you like the Beyond Compliance series. And of course, on the technology side, we'd certainly love an opportunity to talk about how we can help you on the technology side of a lot of what Scott was sharing today. So Scott, thank you again for making the time in your busy schedule. We really appreciate it. Glad we were able to track you down. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, and feel free to email me. I'm open to have conversations with the industry. You don't have to pay for that. This is my commitment to the industry. I don't work with chicken and blueberries. I only work with the seafood industry, so don't give me a call about anything else. But I'm happy to have discussions about the supply chain in the seafood industry and how having a relationship might be a good fit.
No, that's excellent. I appreciate it, and your passion definitely comes through, and we're thankful to have you as a resource. So thanks for being here. Thank all of you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you on our next session. Have a wonderful day.